Good morning, friends, and welcome to Wake Up in the Word. Thanks for joining me this morning. You better grab a strong cup of coffee and go with me to Revelation chapter 6 as a background as we talk about what's going on right now in history, what's gone on in the past, and look at what the Scripture has said and be amazed. Oh, you see, we are recording this on October the 12th, 2023. You may be watching it at a much later date, but we're dealing with the historical ramifications of the Hamas attack on Israel. Horrific and terrible things that have taken place that we thought no army would literally do, like killing elderly, women, children, babies decapitated in their beds. I mean, things that you just don't imagine anyone wanting to do to anybody, but yet they were not only done, but now being celebrated in some parts of the world. It just defies the imagination almost to think of this. But yet the leader of Hamas yesterday stood and declared a global jihad. That's right, a global uprising. Matter of fact, he's calling for a day of anger tomorrow on Friday the 13th. Here in October of 2023, to rise up those that will fight against Israel and Jews everywhere and the Christians that would stand with them. That's the call. And he's made it very impassioned with a plea to come spill your blood for the sake of Palestine, calling on Muslims everywhere to do this. Now, honestly, most Muslims won't even take time to listen to what this idiot says. But considering the huge population of Muslims in the world, as we've seen, terrorism from Islamic hands has continued unabated throughout history and more recently escalated after 9/11. So there will be plenty of takers who will want to do things just like a Muslim terrorist did in Cairo, Egypt, by just killing 2 Israeli tourists as this thing was going on with Hamas in Israel. You'll see it over and over and over again. The anti-Semitism that seems to be rising around the world has put Jews, as well as Messianic Jews and Christians that support all of the above, in great danger, as these people seem to think violence is okay. It's okay to kill anybody that relates to these groups. And you would have thought that these kind of protests would happen as they did immediately the next day, only in nations like terrorist Iran. But oh no, what did we have? Immediately a parade in support of Hamas in New York City. Oh, friends, listen, we live in the last days. And so, yes, you can expect some things like this, but does this prophecy of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse predict a pattern that's been true throughout history? We talked about how an emperor like Nero and a succession of emperors, according to preterists, really fit the picture of these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. But you know, there are other figures in history that could be an antichrist. Remember, John, in his epistle, 1 John, says many antichrists, plural, have already gone out into the world. So could it be we will see a succession of these throughout history right up until the final man of lawlessness steps onto the stage just before Jesus comes back? Well, I think that is exactly what the Scripture is telling us, not to wait for one guy at the very end of things and all those before just, no. They weren't empowered by Satan. No, they aren't antichrists. So come on, there's only one. No, the Scripture says there are plural, there are many. And that's why I think this particular prophecy is demonstrating the pattern that follows every antichrist. We saw how this first seal was opened, and John said, I looked, there was a white horse rider that held a bow. A crown was given to him. He went out to conquer, as a conqueror, in order to conquer. And so the conquering always takes place with this Antichrist figure who wants to have control. What follows is the fiery red horse of war. Yes, they're willing to slaughter people by the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, yes, even millions to get what they want. Following that, of course, is the plague of how you manage to survive economically. The black horse talks about just how difficult it is when you have these wars spread all over the world. And then a fourth seal with a strange-looking green horse. Death and Hades follows that horse. So, do we have a figure in history that lines up with all of this, that reminds us of what's going on right now with the calls for an Islamic jihad? Oh, most certainly we do. In the year 635 to 638 AD, Jerusalem found itself under siege by Muslims. You see, it was Muhammad who, mounting the imaginary white horse that he said came with the angel Gabriel, flew over the Middle East, including Jerusalem, where he would take a look at all the lands he would conquer. That's right, here he goes as a conqueror on a white horse by his own confession. And what does he do? Well, he focuses his attack on those that he's most embittered against, who refused to recognize him as a prophet, the Christians and the Jews. He especially has a hatred for the Jews, and it's full, the Quran, for example, and all his other writings are full of that bitterness and hatred, especially for the Jews. Well, what do we have? Keep in mind, all biblical prophecy has as its eyes, its place of focus, where it's looking from the city of Jerusalem, God's apple of his eye, the place from whence he has offered salvation to all humanity. Jerusalem's the place of the cross. It's the place of the resurrection. Jerusalem is the city of David. It is so significant in the history of course, Judaism and Christianity, that what a better target for the enemies of Christ and the enemies of the Jews, the Antichrists, what a better target than Jerusalem. So in 635 to 638 AD, a very close friend of Muhammad is Caliph Umar, who's leading the army. And that army did conquer Jerusalem. It fell into Muslim hands and stayed there until General Allenby marched through the gate. By the way, wouldn't march on his horse. He dismounted. He said he couldn't dare ride through the gates of Jerusalem. He walked through as he came right there at the end of World War I to free Jerusalem for the first time in centuries from Muslim hands. Now, what's interesting is as you look at history, all throughout history, you will see warfare taking place just like we have seen here recently in Israel. Go all the way back to, what happened? What happened was Islam began its mission to conquer the world and bring everyone into the faith of Islam. And you must submit. You must recognize that the ultimate goal, as is laid out in Islamic eschatology, is for Islam to rule the world. Well, with that in mind, Islamic caliphs have tried to do just that throughout history, and they have fought valiantly to try to conquer the world and bring about Allah's vision of an entirely Muslim world. And that fighting has gone on ever since. And just to give you an idea of how that works, you can go back to something that happened in October as well in 1571, the Battle of Lepanto, which was a great sea battle for that matter in the Mediterranean. Cyprus had been invaded by Muslim Turks, and what they did on Cyprus was flayed alive Christians, gave some the opportunity to convert to Islam, but if you didn't convert, you're going to be killed. The leader of that island, who refused to convert to Islam, was viciously tortured to death. European nations sent a fleet in response to what happened on Cyprus, and the Holy League, in its attack at Lepanto, did win the battle, but they lost 12 ships and 10,000 men in the process, while Muslims lost some 230 ships, 117 of which were captured, and 30,000 men. The leader, Ali Pasha, was finally killed in battle. The leader of the European fleet was a guy named Don Juan, believe it or not. This is the kind of thing that happened over and over through history. Matter of fact, 100 years later, Europe will be invaded to the very point of the gates of Vienna by these same Muslim Ottoman Turks of the empire that is ruled by Islamic law. And as we look at today, it comes all the way down to a time in which once again people are crying for a rise of the old caliph, the old caliphate. That was part of the same cry that went with ISIS, that went with the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. Every one of them has the same objective in mind. So friends, we're going to look at this a little bit more tomorrow and recognize that one of the great fulfillments of this prophecy might actually be in the religion of the Antichrist, Islam, as it continues to terrorize the world. Well, God bless you. We'll see you again right here tomorrow. Wake up in the Word with us, and we'll help you understand everything that's going on.